You're listening to the Modern Mainframe, BMC's intelligent C optimization and transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues in the mainframe and how BMC AMI solutions can help you make change your competitive advantage.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Modern Mainframe. I'm Matt Lair. On January 17th, 2025, enforcement of the European Union's Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA, will begin. In force since January 2023, DORA's regulatory framework aims to strengthen the data security of financial institutions across EU member states. While it's aimed at financial organizations such as banks, insurance companies, and investment firms, DORA also applies to third-party firms which provide them with services. So with such wide-ranging impact, DORA's scope extends beyond the EU, with companies around the world in both the financial and information technology sectors preparing to ensure compliance. Joining me today to discuss the importance of operational resilience in the mainframe and how it is more than just a matter of compliance, our Futurum Vice President and Practice Leader, Stephen Dickens, BMC Senior Manager of Software Consulting, John Dorman, Senior Product Manager David Lee, and Field Sales Managers Peter Plevka and Ken Chisholm. So Stephen, John, David, Peter, Ken, thank you for joining us today.
Hey Matt, thanks for the opportunity. Great to chat to you guys today.
So to start us off, Stephen, could you discuss some of the key factors driving organizations to prioritize operational resilience in the face of evolving workloads such as AI, generative AI, and cloud technologies?
Yeah, I think, DORA, we've just done some research for you guys. And as I dug into this topic, DORA, whilst it's a European framework and should be something that obviously people based in those 27 member states need to be really focused on, a key point for me was operational resilience needs to be the goal, not just compliance with the framework. So let's get that out there straight away. A lot of people are thinking this is a European regulatory framework. I've got to be thinking about that if I'm a bank in 27 countries. I think this gives the globe and all of the countries around the world a really well codified framework to work towards. The other key piece to mention, and Ken and I were chatting about this off camera, is all of the large global banks have a presence in Europe. So even if you're a US, New York-based global bank, for instance, you're going to have to comply with this for your European operations. So if you're doing that, you might as well use the framework to come back into your US operation. So I think that's a good framing comment to start with, and we'll pick up on that when Ken and I chat a bit later. But I think for me, this focus is just part of the ongoing focus of the mainframe. If you look at where the mainframe's been over almost 60 years now, it's been a platform baked in operational resilience. We talk about 8 nines. IBM certified the platform for 8 nines in the GDPS framework. So the ability for this platform to operate at scale with transactional integrity, with the ability to operate over a long period of time without outages, both planned or unplanned, is a key framework of the platform. And then if you look at that, then sort of against the landscape that you described, Matt, around what's going on from AI workloads, the cybersecurity threat landscape, how people are interacting with their bank at unusual times of the day to check balances. There really is an increased number of threats, increased number of demand, and those SLAs are in focus. So I think it's really crucial that everyone globally focuses on this DORA framework. If you're in a really small country in a far-flung part of the world and you're running a mainframe, it's probably a great place to start to think about how you should be thinking about focused on operational resilience.
So what factors does DORA cover? What is DORA compliance? And why is it significant for organizations relying on mainframe systems?
Well, it's a codified set of rules looking at digital operational resilience. So that's a broad church and it's a lot of regulation. These things aren't written in 1 or 2 pages, so it's a big document. I see Ken here sort of nodding and smiling. I mean, it's a massive regulatory framework, But really, the essence of this is how do you, as a regulated industry, as a banking organization, focus on being operationally resilient? There's lots of components to that, whether that's operational at the operator level. How do you sort of focus on alerting and monitoring, and how do you monitor your systems for uptime, right through to security and some of the implications there. We'll also be talking about kind of one thing I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this actually in the UK, which, whether you like this or not, is outside of the EU regulatory framework now, but around concentration risk for data centers. So, thinking through your backup and recovery and fault tolerance. So this is a pretty comprehensive set of regulatory frameworks that, as I say, banks globally should be looking at as they plan for their operations going forward.
And dealing with financial institutions, insurance companies, it obviously is going to affect mainframe organizations quite a bit.
I think it's the Venn diagram. If you look at the organizations that are covered by this framework and the mainframe install base in Europe and more globally, the Venn diagram of where those organizations overlap. So this isn't a mainframe-based regulatory framework. This is a framework for banking operations that involves all compute platforms. But if you look at the Venn diagram of how many of those customers are highly regulated by this type of framework and have mainframes and run their mission critical systems, there's a lot of overlap of those two groups.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think when you look at the mainframe itself and the areas of consideration within operational resilience, it's going to be the data volumes and the processing components of this, which are going to be of probably greatest concern, given that the mainframe is the system of record for so many of these financial services organizations. So ensuring data integrity and availability is a critical part of all of this. And although we're discussing this within the framework of DORA itself, operational resilience is a much broader church than what is contained within DORA. And you are looking at things which are not only going to be confined to technology challenges, but it can be right through natural disasters, pestilence, etc. So operational resiliency is a key focus, and achieving that has a byproduct of being able to support the regulatory compliance as well.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it, John, and you make a really valid point, is it's platforms, tools, people, and processes. If you've got all four of those, this is what I don't think anybody should take away the fact that we're on a mainframe podcast talking about this, that this is a mainframe problem. It's obviously wider than that. It's wider than the core technology. But I think the key thing to think about is, as these regulators look at enforcing this regulation, they're going to be thinking, where's the crown jewels of the data? Where's the main system of record? And where do I need to maintain that integrity? So systems of engagement, like your mobile banking app and the infrastructure that supports that, whilst they're important and under scope of this type of framework, those systems of record, like the mainframe, are going to be the most crucial things that regulators focus on. I mean, Ken, we were talking about this off camera. You had the chance to do a 3-week work trip, where you went round and you were sharing with us that you'd spent time with 14 customers. Can you maybe share some of what those customers were saying? Because I think from the interaction we had off camera, I think there's going to be some golden nuggets there that we can share with the listeners.
Certainly. There were a few items that were prominent in those conversations. One of them is there's a bigger focus on mainframes now than there has been previously, because DORA calls out all critical infrastructure. And for other regulatory environments or guidelines, the mainframe has sort of been able to stay behind the scenes. But as soon as DORA called out all critical infrastructure, as you mentioned, Stephen, everybody's aware, if the mainframe has an issue, the business has an issue. So the spotlight is now shined on the mainframe in a way that it hasn't been before. One of the other things that I've noticed is over half of the organizations that I spoke with have been visited by the European Central Bank. Now, the European Central Bank is a proactive agency that's going out and knocking on the doors of these financial institutions, and they're knocking on the doors of all financial institutions that are doing business with the European Union.
So let me stop you there, Ken, because I think that's a really, really crucial point.
Sure.
This isn't Barclays, for instance, or Credit Suisse that are based in. Maybe I should update it. Barclays aren't based in the EU anymore. They're based in the UK, and we're not part of the EU anymore. But maybe let's leave that politics aside. These EU banks, it's not Deutsche Bank, it's not Credit Suisse, it's not some of the big European banks only. It's also people and banks that operate in that market. They could be based in Hong Kong, they could be based in New York, they could be based around the world, but if they operate in that market, they also come under that regulatory framework.
That's exactly right. So, in fact, a few of my meetings were in the UK because they're so tightly intertwined with the EU operations. And there are banks in the US as well that have European operations that have been visited by the European Central Bank, the ECB, and they're being asked from the ECB to do a stress test. And that stress test is essentially prove to me that you can protect from and recover from a cyber attack. And that pointed question is causing a fair amount of consternation with mainframe organizations who've never really had to deal with that kind of a pointed conversation with regulators who are proactive in their probing.
Peter, I see you nodding here on the camera. I mean, I think based on your geography, I'd love to bring you into the discussion here and sort of get your perspective. What are you hearing as you interact with customers? I know Ken's just been on a 3-week vacation road tripping around Europe, but you're in this market on a day-to-day basis. What are you hearing?
What I'm hearing is a lot of comments about DORA it being an incremental step to a best practice for operational resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
So the mainframe platform is mature and a lot of these disciplines are already in place, but there are things that are a reality now, evolving workloads such AI. Most of the critical business data lies on the mainframe. And with new AI capabilities of the Z16 hardware, for example, more organizations need to be more resilient if they're going to do AI on the mainframe platform, and therefore need to strengthen that resilience. Second is the mainframe platform. IBM opened up the mainframe platform more than 20 years ago with the first Linux processor, and we see more and more an increase. We see an increase in entry points into the mainframe organization, causing complexity and questioning the current posture of operational resiliency. So it is certainly people are aware and they see certain things they need to do. And that's currently where we are, especially about the data, because the mainframe turns into a database server more and more for those organizations.
Well, Peter, you were the first person to mention AI on the podcast. I think we broke a record for a podcast in 2024, but I think we maybe went 10 minutes without mentioning AI. So, David, bringing you into the conversation here, we mentioned AI there, and Peter brought it up. We mentioned the platform being increasingly that source of data.
Yep.
In your role as a product manager, where do you see that kind of starting to interact with the BMC portfolio as we look at sort of AMI Ops, the need to move to AI Ops? Where do you see that kind of coming through in the product management sort of roadmap? How the mainframes got more open, to Peter's comment, and how we're starting to see new workloads come through onto the platform with what IBM's doing with Z16 and opening up the Telum processor for AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's kind of a couple of, I'll do it from two angles. The first one is kind of our ops product set. So they have a product that is now supporting AI to kind of predicting problems before they occur. Our clients are demanding that AI is used, and we're kind of catching up with the rest of the enterprise. There's so many capabilities out there, and we need to be absolutely exploiting everything the platform can offer. So we're kind of looking at it from that perspective. It's predicting problems before they happen, which is the one side of the coin. The other side is when we come to security, it's improving your security posture. So it's not so much predicting security events, but it's hardening your security posture. So what we're doing there is looking at things like user behavior analytics and things like this. So when we take the static security controls, once they're in, they can be misconfigured, they can be given incorrectly. If you can give an extra layer and say what is normal for a user and catch that behavior or report on that behavior before they do work or when they do it for forensic investigations and things like that, that really hardens your security posture. And you can start looking at users on a case-by-case basis rather than roles. So it allows extra granularity that it's just impossible to do as a human effort. The extended security use case as well is off the mainframe. It's cliche, but we say the mainframe is not an island. It certainly isn't. We're getting a lot of demand from clients to be sending events, be that security or operational data, into data lakes. And they're starting to look at the enterprise as a whole from a single place.
So, David, you mentioned security. Ken, bringing you back in, know that this is your focus area within BMC. What are you seeing as some of those kind of key best practices around risk management, incident management, governance, awareness, visibility from a security lens? What are you seeing both from a product management point of view, and then as you also see those from some of those client conversations that I know you're having on a regular basis?
Sure. I will reemphasize what David was saying about applying AI to user behavior analytics.
Mm-hmm.
The mainframe attacks we've seen have been done by insiders. So the question I get asked is, if an insider has gone rogue or somebody has obtained the credentials of an insider, they look like the people we trust, but now they're doing things differently. How do I detect that? So that's where user behavior analytics comes in. It gives you the ability to say this person is operating in a way differently than they normally operate. And that is what threat actors do. The other thing, I'll point out two items. One of them that I haven't heard, but I did hear a lot in these conversations. There's a move to incorporating immutable backups on the mainframe, right? And that hasn't happened really until the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years. Organizations are embracing this immutable backup technology.
And Ken, to chime in there,
Sure.
is that
Mhm.
that's not just from a resilience point of view? Can I get to my backup in a DR perspective? What I'm seeing is a real sort of change of I need an immutable copy of this for a cyber resilience, not just an operational resiliency. And are you seeing the cloud come through as part of that requirement? So it's kind of moving beyond the scope of just the mainframe, and people are looking at, hey, I've maybe got highly available storage connected directly to my mainframe, but as I pull through the requirement for an immutable copy, maybe they're thinking broader than just what's connected to the platform, and they're thinking about the cloud. Is that coming through in your discussions?
Absolutely. They're looking at different platforms in order to manage that immutable backup.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a component that I'll talk about in a second that was a part of our conversations. But I would go back to the mutable backups as something new I've seen on the mainframe. And that's really from a security standpoint. You have to have a backup that an attacker cannot destroy
Mm-hmm.
as part of your cyber resilience profile. The next aspect that I've heard is, how do I know which backup to use? And if there is an attack, you have to go through a forensic analysis capability in order to figure out who was doing what, when were they doing it, what did they attack. So there's a forensic analysis, which is an interactive session that includes mainframe subject matter experts and security subject matter experts, where they really dissect what was happening, and that will lead to what is the safe backup to use. Because if you restore from a corrupted backup, you are really toast. That is not a good situation.
So I think we've described this sounds like a lot for teams to be taking on board. There's a new regulatory framework coming in that's got teeth. The ECB are starting to go around and nudge these teams to get them to focus on it. I'm going to go around the horn here. Maybe if you could give me one or two things that you think clients should be thinking about and recommendations that you would be making to those clients. So, John, I'm going to pick on you first. So maybe I get to pick on you first, but also you get the clearest swim lane to think of an answer. So maybe there's a dual benefit to this. So based on all of your experience, what should clients be thinking about? And if you could pick one recommendation, what would that be?
I would say not to look back on the past and assume that that's the best option for you, because you've been doing this for the last decade or more, therefore you think you've got it covered. Because the environment's changing, the pressures are changing, the nature of the threat actors are very different. Now, you may think you have it covered, maybe you've tested it now and again, but if I use the analogy of a car, that you've got the demands of resilience to make sure that you can keep on going, you've probably got a spare wheel. Hopefully you've tested it out so you know it's got enough pressure and you've actually got a jack in the car. But is that the best thing for your business today? Should you be running on run-flat tyres so you actually have no interruption to service, that you've got the ability to keep moving? Mm-hmm. And because of not only the changes in the threats, but the changes in the technology available, to look forwards rather than backwards to assess what you've invested, and to get third-party input on that, which will be demanded by the regulatory compliance anyway, that self-certification is no longer an option. It has to be confirmed by an external resource.
So that's fantastic points. I think that third-party validation, maybe that teams haven't had to do that before, and that's going to be a new piece here. Peter, coming to you next, what would be your recommendation?
What I would like to mention here is the early detection of situations. And I say this not just in terms of the security and the user behavior and cyber criminals entering a system, entering the mainframe, as Ken said, most likely someone from the inside. The earlier you can detect, the mainframe hasn't been looked at for these kind of things in the last 10 years, and viruses were not on the mainframe. So that's still the thinking. So, and it's early detection, not just about security events, but also about system slowdown, system events, and understanding changes to the system, to applications early, because we're talking about operational resiliency here, and you want to run your car all the time, to use John's analogy. And the earlier you can detect, and a monitor here is not enough anymore, because it tells you when something goes from green to red, and that's sometimes maybe too late. And therefore, early detection would be my input here on your question, Steve.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. So, David, coming to you next. What would be your recommendation? You get a really interesting perspective from a product management, and you're starting to see all of that kind of come through and be synthesized as you talk to clients. What would your recommendation be? And you can't say buy my products. That one's not allowed.
No. So at risk of giving Ken nothing to speak about, I'll try and keep it focused on one thing. So first of all, like we've discussed, the platform is the system of record. So many times over my career in the mainframe, said, "Oh, out of scope. Auditors will come to it last." Like that is not. It's not going to be acceptable going forward. When it comes to operational resilience, you've got kind of two sides to it. There's the detection and response, but you've also got the recovery. And the question I would ask clients is, how much data are you willing to lose in the event of an attack? Because you've got to work backwards from there, really. We talk about things like transaction recovery and this was no data loss and this kind of thing, but ultimately this is not a technical argument. This comes back to a regulation, and there's a business argument here as well.
Yeah, I agree. That makes a great point. That's going to be my recommendation when I go last. So I think, David, you've maybe stolen a bit of my thunder, but I'll elaborate. So, Ken, you go next to last. So apologies there that maybe some of the other guys on the podcast here have stolen your thunder. But what would your recommendation be?
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of David's comment because there's an epiphany that's taking place for organizations that have these immutable backups in place. And that is, if I have to revert to an immutable backup that I took 2 hours ago, I've just lost 2 hours of financial transactions. And these financial institutions are realizing I can't afford to lose 2 hours worth of financial transactions. So developing a recovery strategy that doesn't impact your business in a significant way is really key to what I think is behind this operational resilience push. And that's where I see organizations heading.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Building on your comments there, Ken and David, my recommendation would be understand recovery point objective and recovery time objective. If you can recover your systems in an hour, that's great from an outage. But if the recovery point is 3 hours back, you haven't lost an hour of outage, you've lost 3 hours of outage. You've now got an operational stress to recover 3 hours worth of back of data, rebuild those transactions and build forward, or you may have lost them. So as I sort of look at this, some of the terms and reliability, availability, serviceability, understanding the distinction between those things, these are mainframe terms of decades old. And then recovery point objective. So how close, if something goes wrong in the middle of the night, what's the point at the last transaction that you can recover? And then the time to get yourself back from an outage or some type of event. If people new to this space, people trying to understand it, some of the older hands will understand recovery point and recovery time and RPO and RTO and the difference. If you're newer to this space, just spend a couple of hours reading about the differences between those. It'll help frame your thinking of how you look at mainframe resilience and operational resilience for this platform as a whole. So we're almost coming to the end here. I think as we start to wrap up, can you just we've started to do this, but what are the key takeaways that you're starting to see? We got those recommendations from you guys, so I'll go around the horn again. What are the key takeaways? Ken, I'll probably come to you first because I think from your recent road trip around Europe, I think you've got a really good perspective. We were chatting about this off camera, but I think sharing some of those key takeaways from chatting to 14 of those banks in Europe and beyond on your recent trip, what would your key takeaways be from this?
It's surprising to see where organizations are on that pathway to becoming resilient. Some are exploring, some have already implemented some things, and some are further down the road where they're close to being able to actually demonstrate a recovery capability. So for me, the wide spectrum of where organizations are in their ability to respond to the resiliency question was surprising to me.
So, John, I'll go to you next. There's some great points there from Ken. I think that point that came across from me came from what you said is clients are on a journey. Nobody's actually finally there, and there's points along this journey where the install base is. What are your key takeaways, John? What's your sort of, if you had to boil it down for me?
Okay, well, reflecting on the fact that this is a journey, I'd like to just point out that the journey never ends. This isn't a one-off exercise. Tick all the boxes. We're now DORA compliant, because this is, as I said before, it's about operational resilience, which is a process of continuing improvement. And you need to be aware of that when you construct your teams. Yes, you want to have a delivery team to manage the business as usual, but you also want to have an engineering team which will look at every incident that has happened and just reflect back on that. Could things have been done better? Could they have been done differently? Are there new facilities available which are going to make us better? And just to make that part of the cycle, because it will be ongoing.
Yeah, it's a great point. This is almost a sort of circular piece rather than a sort of a path along a line. There isn't an end for this journey. David, I'll maybe go to you next. What would your key takeaway be?
I think that the big thing to take away from a product perspective and working with clients is this, for many clients, is a completely new challenge that they've got to solve. There's no existing solution in place that can be maybe upgraded or shoehorned in. There's a completely new set of challenges, and the fact that it's backed by regulation is going to vastly improve our client security posture. It's going to leave the industry in a really, really strong shape, and it's going to be good for, ultimately better for everybody.
Fantastic. And nice to see you back, Peter. What would your key takeaway be? We lost you there for a minute, but what would your takeaway be?
Fix the internet connection here. That's one key takeaway. I wanted to comment on the
operational resilience written large as part of the podcast. I love it.
And I wanted to comment on the recovery time objective very briefly, because part of all of this, it's an incremental step, and DORA pushes us towards that. So a lot of people think about that recovery time objective, but here is another question. Prove to me that you can recover your critical production data on a mainframe in 2, 3, or 4 hours. That's a simple question. Not a lot of customers can do this today, even though they're testing it every year in their DR test, and the mainframe is included. So just wanted to comment on this. And my key takeaway, look at it as a very, let's say, comprehensive insurance policy that you build up here, talking about the long term. It's not ending, it's always going on. And it's the logical next step from just taking backups and saying, well, that's enough. It's not enough. You have to include the mainframe in a event and impact management process. You have to early detect, come back to my original comment, and integrate the mainframe more and more in this overall view of your business. And that's going to be my key takeaway here.
So I get to cheat. I get to ask all of you guys for your one takeaway, and I get to maybe do maybe more than one. So a couple of key takeaways from me. This is a EU regulation, but I think you should be thinking about operational resilience as the goal, not as compliance to a framework. So you should be thinking about this if your organizations are either operating in the EU, you're certainly going to be impacted this. But I think if you're a bank in the far-flung parts of the world, this is probably not a bad framework to be thinking about and to start thinking about how you could operationalize this. I think the key thing that some of you guys have already mentioned is this is new. There is some new requirements. Ken, you mentioned immutable copies. So I think there's going to be a need to invest in tools in this space. You're not going to be able to achieve this level of operational resilience without looking at making some investment and looking at tools to invest in, because there's going to be new requirements coming through. And I think my final takeaway would be you've got to look broader than just that mainframe platform. You've got to be looking at the whole of your operational landscape. You've got to be looking at some of the things that we talked about. And you've got to be looking at getting senior executives involved in this process. So this is more than just, hey, I need to buy some mainframe tools. You've got to be collaborating with those line of business owners and those executives and bringing forward some of the requirements. So, Matt, this has been a fantastic conversation. Probably hand it back to you so that we keep ourselves on time here.
Oh, it really has been a great conversation. Thank you for leading it. And everyone, Stephen, John, Ken, David, Peter, thank you for joining us for this. It's an important conversation, and you made it interesting and covered all the good points. So thank you all for being here. And thank you also to everyone listening. Please feel free to drop us a line and let us know your thoughts on the subject. We have several blog posts, ebooks, and other assets. I'll put the links to those in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. And until next time, take care.
You're listening to the Modern Mainframe, BMC's Intelligent C Optimization and Transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues in the mainframe and how BMC AMI solutions can help you make change your competitive advantage.